Hello everybody, in today's video I'm showing you how I created these ceramic wall art pieces. This is a brand new thing for me and I thought it would be a super fun project to try out, and I thought I would show you the process of how I created these so you guys can make this at your home or studio as well. So let's get started. As always with any ceramic piece, I'm starting out with clay. My go-to clay is a beige stoneware clay for my specific style. So I'm starting out by bashing the clay with a rolling pin to flatten it out. It's a lot easier to flatten it out this way when it's an extra thick piece. And after that, I'm just starting the long process of rolling the slab out. I'll roll a little bit, then flip it over and roll again. It would definitely be nice to have a slab roller for projects like this. Perhaps one day I will have one, but right now they are super expensive. So for now, I'm just gonna have to struggle with a rolling pin. Maybe I should just buy a bigger one. That would probably be easier too. I placed these two wooden pieces on the edges of my slab to make sure that the slab is an even thickness. They are 1/4 of an inch thick, because that's how thick I want my wall art pieces to be. After I have my slab rolled out, I'm just compressing the clay with a wooden rib. I go over it quite a few times because I want it to be smooth and I don't want the piece to warp or crack in any way. I compress both sides. For my specific wall art pieces, I want them to be a circle, so I'm just using a plate to trace out the shape. You can make these in any shape that you want. You can make them in a more organic flowy shape. You can make them in the shape of an animal, a circle like me, rectangle, whatever you please. So this is the last thing I'm doing for this day because I'm letting these slabs dry out for a few days under plastic until they separate themselves from the wood. I don't want to move them whatsoever when they're sticking to the wood because that's when I notice they warp. So as you can see here, it's dry enough for me to just slide it right off the wood, and when I hold it, it holds its shape instead of bending. So once the clay is in that state, I start cleaning it up with a wet sponge. I love this Mud Tools orange sponge to smooth out clay, especially because it pushes the grog right back in the clay. And I'm just stamping the bottom. Here I am flipping it over. Once I have the slab all cleaned up, I'm using this 18 gauge Kanthal wire. It's a high temperature wire specifically made to withstand temperatures up to well over 2000 degrees. You never want to use any typical metal in the kiln because it will melt, so I will link this specific Kanthal wire in the description box so you guys can check it out. Now I'm just marking where I want the wire to go so it's nice and even, and then I'm just pressing it into the clay. And now it's time for my favorite part, which is decorating. I'm decorating my typical hand carved and painted style, and the one I'm showing you today is a crow and mataliha poppies. So I'm starting out by just lightly tracing out my design with a needle tool. I always pre-trace my design so I don't have to fix any deep carved lines. When I'm done tracing, it's time to carve. I usually switch between the Diamond Core L1 carving tool and this Kemper Stylus carving tool. So I tend to use this Kemper carving tool when my clay is a little too wet to use the Diamond Core carving tool. I do prefer the Diamond Core one because it feels more like drawing instead of carving. This tool I have to hold in a more specific angle to get a nice clean straight line as compared to the diamond core carving tool. However, I didn't really have the time to wait for the clay to dry enough to use the diamond core, so the Kemper carving tool it is. I kept some of the carving footage in real time so you can see just how slow the process is as compared to the 8x speed. The carving part doesn't take too long, it's the painting process that takes the longest out of all the steps. Now enjoy some footage of me carving, and I will chime back in a little bit. As always with all my pieces, I'm carving out my background texture. The last thing I need to carve on this piece is the crow's wings. And now we are all done with carving. I'm just wiping off any clay flecks. And now I'm just letting this piece dry out until it's bone dry with a piece of plywood over it to keep it from warping. So when all my carved pieces are bone dry, I brush every piece with a bamboo toothbrush to clean up the carved lines. This makes a huge difference when it comes to carved pieces because there's always a little bit of rough texture and pieces of clay in between the carved lines. As always, I do this step outside because you can see on the camera all of the dust flying off from this process. You never ever want to do this indoors. So after the brushing part, it's time to paint. Painting is a super slow, tedious process, especially because I paint after carving, so I have to keep all my color within the lines. Lately, I've been doing extra thick coats, so I only have to do between 1 and 2 coats. It depends on the brand. With Amico, I usually can do 2 thick coats, and with Laguna's underglazes, I do just 1 thick coat. I apologize for my head and hair getting in a lot of these shots. I have to be quite close to my piece to paint the crisp lines that I like to do. I used to do more of a sgraffito technique with these pieces, where I would quickly paint on just the black of the crow and then carve out these lines, which is most certainly a lot faster. However, I didn't get the crispness that I'd want. When I would carve after the underglaze, the edges would be a little bit more jagged than I would like, especially because I have grog in my clay. So now I carve and then paint, which definitely takes a lot more time. However, it gets me the nice, crisp, smooth lines that I much prefer. These flowers are super tedious to paint because, as you can see, I have to paint around all of the little lines that I did. I do 2 coats of this white as well. I'm gonna try out the Laguna white underglaze because, like I mentioned earlier, with Laguna underglazes, I only have to do 1 thick coat for a nice opaque finish versus 2 thick coats with the Amico underglazes. So I'll let you guys know how I like the white Laguna underglaze in another video once I try it out. Here is the finished piece. Now it's nice and ready to go in the kiln once I finish the other pieces to go along with it. What's nice about these is I'm not applying any type of other glaze, so they're just going into the kiln for 1 firing, going straight to cone 6 for this. And there it is, the finished wall art piece. It turned out even better than I expected. Here's a few of the other wall art pieces I made within this batch. I made a cheetah and palm leaves. Here's a snake and wild roses. And finally, hummingbirds and wildflowers. All of these pieces, along with other neat items, will be available in my early December restock on hanaceramics.com. And as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys all for my next creation.